Joyman Railways. Okie dokie. This is a reprint of what, I don't know, something that works out to be Prussian rails or something like that. I shouldn't be taking this out now. This is going to cause problems. It's pretty decent, actually. Again, I don't know if this bag came with it. It's really awesome if it did. So, I'd say this is perhaps the most interesting of the Winsome designs that I've seen. Certainly not my favorite. My favorite is the Baltimore and Ohio right now because it's the closest to the XX feel. And I think actually manages to do something, you know, a sort of a watered down 18XX, which this does not. I've heard a lot of people comparing this to Chicago Express, and sure, you know, it's got some of the same techniques, but so do all of the Winsome games, or most of them, in terms of, you know, you lay your little choo-choos on the hex tiles. You have stock that produces income and stuff like that. But, you know, like all of them, it's a significantly different. Almost all of them have some significant different changes, and this one certainly does. Some of them are, well, they're what is a very interesting game. Let's talk first a little bit about the components in the Queen Edition. Get a nice box, I'll give you that much. The map is nice. The bag, the wooden pieces, all that's great. I prefer paper money by a tiny bit. These things fall all over the place and make a mess. They're not as bad as poker chips, but there might be a good compromise between poker chips and paper money for people who can't handle the paper money at all. Good, stiff, solid paper money is really good. Most games don't come with good enough paper money, but here is where the game falls apart, is these flimsy little textbook, in terms of college style textbook, very thin, glossy paper things. And the biggest problem is, these are two different chairs. I can't tell them apart. This is brown, this is black. And likewise, these guys are two different colors. Now, when I look at them right next to each other, yes, I can tell. But when I've got them on the table, no, you know, I mean, it takes a great deal of effort to discern the difference. It's not just my eyes, other people have complained about this as well. What else? I'm not sure how to work around this. I might be able to, but this is probably the most annoying factor of the game, is keeping track of the amount the companies produce and then summing that constantly to keep track here. So every time you hit a new city, you have to increment the company's counter here, and then you have to increment all the players' counters here. Chicago Express only has the one track. It doesn't worry about the player track. The player track's important here because it affects what's probably the most interesting facet of this design, which is the little wooden discs for player order, which is kept track of here. Basically, each time you go through a turn, whoever's in first place gets the least little tokens in here, whoever's in last place gets the most, and then 5 of them, or however many there are players, are drawn out, and those are the only people who get to go, which means there's a luck factor in it that's not usually present in the Winsome games or the XX games. I could see some people really disliking that, but it adds a tremendous element of uncertainty to the game. You never know if you're safe with your setup whether or not someone else is going to be able. So if you're in a position where you have a choice to do something or not, you may need to protect yourself by taking an action that maybe isn't your optimal action if you knew what the turn order was. And I really like that factor. I like a little bit of luck in my games, for the most part. So that works really well for me, but I guess some people would find that a little bit too outside the realm of the normal, XX winsome families of train games. What else really got me on this one? I'm trying to think because there's so much to this maneuvering to get your turn order. So the game is about collecting cash, and having the highest income at a given time isn't necessarily advantageous. If no one's going to trigger an income increase, it may not be a good idea to put a stock up that you want to buy, that you know you want to buy, because you're going to push yourself into the position of being able to do less throughout the game. But you could still be ahead in the game because you have more cash on hand than other people. In the long run, income will prevail. There's no question there. But the income that's showing on the table on the board may not be the true income that's there. You could be sitting there ready to grab a number of different locations, but unwilling to actually build with them because that'll drive your income up and make you have to go, make you more likely to get less turns, less actions in the upcoming turn. So that's a very interesting factor to it. Something I don't like about this that most winsome games have. Most winsome games have and this is more of a topicality or subject matter issue. If you have the only share of the company, you get the whole run. If there's 2 shares in the company in most winsome games, you split the value of the run between the people. Shares are like real shares of the company. The more they're out, the more watered down they are. Well, in this game, it ain't that way. Shares become something very strange. By buying another share, by buying the second share, you double the income of the company, essentially. Each player gets that full amount of income. It's got the nice atmosphere of capitalization is through the stock market. I feel like there's something very pure about that, but there's also something a little lacking there. I like games where you can acquire capital in the companies outside of just the stock purchase. But there's so much going on in this one that as a game, I think it's good that that's not there. And likewise, the division. If you had this shared division here, as a game, that would make it more complicated to figure out what your income potential is, etc. And this is one that really, like I said, I think it is the most interesting as a game. If you're looking for one that gives a great deal of subtlety in the decisions and a great deal of options that you can never be certain of, this one's probably the best. If you're looking for something, though, that accurately reflects reality, this one may be among the very worst, certainly that I've seen. And that, of course, decreases my taste in it a great deal. And the other thing is there's this humongous mechanical tax on my brain in terms of keeping all those counters up to date. I think I was unable to do it. I suspect, I know that I screwed up in a couple of places and caught myself, and I kind of stopped wanting to look after a while because it almost always ended up that I had them wrong. The whole interface by which you play this game is frustrating and annoying in that sense. And add to that the stock certificates that Queen Game threw in instead, and it really is becoming, a game that I'm hard pressed to say that I really want to play again, just because of that facet removing so much enjoyment from it. On the other hand, there's something so damned interesting in the way this operates, in the choice between, making the track lays or the stock offering. The possibility in this one, and I've seen this in some of the others, of being able to get yourself in a position where you can buy a stock, help yourself, hurt everyone else who owns that stock. We saw that in my game. That's a horrible situation. Nobody should allow that to happen. It's along the lines of holding your 2 shares of a company. It's also possible where you could help yourself with the last action of the phase. We saw this in my play. Or you could make a protective play. But since you don't know how the next set of tokens is going to come out, you probably want to make the protective play, because you could get screwed really badly by not protecting yourself. All kind of stuff like that is always very, very intriguing to me. But the negatives, for me, probably outweigh the positives on this one. Maybe it would be easier playing it opposed, where I don't have to be the only person tracking all the values. Once they're there, they become a very useful piece of information, and much easier to assess, but the problem is keeping them up to date and keeping them tracked properly. That's going to be really difficult for me, and I'm probably going to screw that up. And I would imagine most groups are going to screw up at least a couple times in a game until they get very, very familiar. Or if there's, an autocrat there who's, now you move your marker up 2, just constantly paying attention to everything that's going on and making sure that everybody's got their markers correct. If that were happening, it would probably work out pretty well as well. Anyway, mixed feelings. I'm glad I have it. It kind of impressed me in ways that I didn't expect to be impressed. But again, it's more in that game fashion than in the enjoyment fashion, and certainly not particularly in the storyline fashion. The Winsome games usually do blur together for me, though. For example, Pampas Rails, which was the first one I looked at, I'm told is also very interesting. But I didn't feel that level of interest in it. I didn't feel it to be terribly more intriguing from when I got to playing things like American Rails, which I think is Chicago Express, if I'm not mistaken. Again, they all blur together, and they blur together with Wallace's Age of Steam and Paris Rails or Paris Connection, which I don't think is a Winsome either. They all just kind of feel like these much lighter, not really part of a system in the way that 18XX is. And I don't think they're intended to be part of the system. They're intended to be different takes on kind of this train theme. But that's okay. It's just, it makes it much harder for me to think of them as a set or to distinguish them from each other, because they are different enough that they all kind of blur together in a way that 18XX just doesn't for me. I play an 18XX game, and I have a pretty good memory of it. I mean, 1889, I played it once. Some while ago, 1861, I played it for the first time, a long time ago. They each have facets that really stick in my head, maybe because they are so similar. Kind of like war games do. These guys are all different enough that I kind of stumble away saying, I don't really remember any of the others very well. I kind of remember this one now, so that's a tough thing to judge. I would rather play most of the others than this one, just because of that mechanical aspect. I feel like if I could play this one, a few times in a row, probably opposed, I would get a lot more comfortable with the thinking processes that go on in it. Let's see what we have here. It's so minimal of a game, but it seems so strange. People talk about, the people who are really into this talk about, every stock offer, every action you make is almost a diplomatic maneuver. And I'll never see them that way. I always feel like I'm able to optimize on my own, and like there are times where I want to buy that share for $1 because I can, or some ridiculously small amount, not counting on the railroad being particularly good, but making a small investment and getting a big return off of it. Where maybe if I made a larger investment, perhaps I'd make more off that rail, but it would probably cut into my chances overall. So that's an aspect and an element of these games that I have a great deal of difficulty actually seeing. It almost always seems like somebody gets into a position where they're no longer doing that. They're just able to straight out take advantage of the system. That may be my unfamiliarity with each game, but that's just, a little thing that I've noted that nobody else seems to be bothered by or impressed by either one. I guess it just doesn't happen in their games, but if you're someone who doesn't play a game too many times, I think it would be a normal state. This one, like a lot of the Queen games, it comes out in 4 different languages here. I don't know how much cheaper that is, but when I looked at Assyrian Wars by Udo Grab, I had the kind of pleasure of seeing, hey, this has an English rule book, but it's a game that was printed in multiple languages. And I kind of wonder how much it inflates the price to include both, or if it actually works out cheaper because they can just say, just pack it all together. This is the multilingual version, and we're going to sell it everywhere, and it's easier that way. This is the kind of thing that I worry about and wonder about. Anyway, this is an interesting one. I'm hoping that I can find people to play it with me sometime. Like most of these train games, the 18XX, I had a long history of a lot of the other earlier ones, but now these Winsomes, some of the more recent 18XXs that I've gotten my hands on, I'm finding it hard to find people willing to actually sit down and play any of them. It's always either non-train-like Euros that people want to play. By non-train-like, I mean not of these families particularly. So like Russian Rails gets played, or whatever it's called. Or people who want to play more wargame-ish type things. Kind of miss being able to, break out something like this. These are sort of my kind of Euros, right? All right, let's send it up.